In this video, I will be putting these two games side by side. Obviously, it is impossible to compare them 100% accurately as both games have different functions, the other one does not. But we'll do it as close as we can, and I will not judge which game does which thing better. I will leave that for you to decide in the comments. I will only give you my personal preferences. We'll start off with simple things and then move into a little bit more complicated comparisons. So starting off with walking, obviously it's pretty much the same, there's not much to compare it, but I just wanted to put it side by side. Then once we put running side by side, again, feels pretty much all the same, not that there is really much of a difference, that is, until you start sprinting. Obviously at that point it immediately becomes better in Wuwa simply because, well, there is no energy. And not only there is no energy, you also are recovering some energy when you're running. So obviously this one goes to Wuwa. Swimming is again about the same, but I'll have to give this one to Genshin, as Genshin has characters like Mona or Furina that can actually dash through water or just, simply walk through water, and that kinda gives you a little bit more flexibility. Gliding in both games I feel as it feels more or less the same, and it looks very similar as well. Now moving into the climbing, again on the first hand it feels pretty similar, both games do feel a lot like the same, that is, until you start sprinting, which you can do in Wuwa and you cannot do in Genshin, so this one has to go to Wuwa. Although it doesn't look realistic, but it is more convenient, so that's why Wuwa it is. Now the next one will be character designs. Now my personal preference between these two would be Genshin Impact. I like the vast selection of characters, and I know that Wuwa is a younger game, but still, we're just comparing these two games as they are right now, not how they're gonna be in the future. I also think that the characters in Genshin just look absolutely lovely. Admittedly, I do think that maybe characters in Wuwa have a little bit more detail than the ones in Genshin, but it's just something about Genshin characters for me. I just love the way they look, and I'll have to give it to Genshin, but this is just my personal preference, like I said. For the main characters of these two games, that would be the Traveler and the Rover. Comparing these two guys, or girls, I think this one has to go to Rover. He's a clear winner in my eyes. It's a more fleshed out character. He doesn't have Paimon to explain everything for him. He looks a little bit better. He's actually a little bit more usable. And just overall design, I prefer Rover to Traveler. I think Traveler seems way too basic in my eyes. Now moving into the combat, although these games have very different combat, and I would like to say it's very hard to compare them, and in some ways it is, and in other ways it just isn't. Wuwa is just simply better in this regard, there's not even a debate about it. Wuwa is definitely on the very top, it's the king of gacha games in terms of combat, and it's not even close. It's way more fleshed out, it's way more complex. The animations are way better, and overall it just feels so much better. But again, in other ways it's pretty hard to compare them, as Wuwa has this tactical gameplay of combat. On the other hand, Genshin is just pretty much dump every ability you have and then just hope for the biggest damage possible. So it's a bit hard to compare them in some ways. Moving into a little bit of a content selection, starting off with the Abyss and the Tower of Adversity. I don't like either of them that much, if I'm being honest. Again, that's just my personal preferences, but I don't like either of them. I think they're too boring, there's really not that much interest in them. It's just pretty much kill a bunch of monsters as fast as you can, really, that's about it. I will still have to give it to the Genshin. I'm not a big fan of that system in Wuthering Waves, where once you use the character, it has this energy taken out, and then you cannot use these characters anymore after a certain amount of times you use them. I'm not a fan of that, and that's kind of really about the only reason I would give it to Genshin. Otherwise, I don't like either of these two. Moving into Imaginarium Theater and Realm of Elusive. Honestly, this one I'll have to give it to Wuwa. It's a lot more creative, it's a lot more interesting, it's a lot more random, which gives it a little bit better replayability. There's a vast selection of things you can choose, characters you can choose, the way you approach these runs. In general, I just think it's so much better. As for the theater in Genshin, I think it's better than Spiral Abyss, but it still leaves you with things to be desired. And I think the biggest thing I don't like about it is that if you don't have certain characters, you simply cannot play it. You need a lot of characters with specific types, otherwise you're locked out of a part of content, maybe even a big part of it, if not all of it, because there are seasons, and one of these seasons you may not even have enough characters for like a basic run. I don't think that's a great system, but still, I like it more than Spiral Abyss. but it could definitely be improved. Moving into the weekly bosses, I think both do reasonably well job. The problem with Genshin, however, is that some of the bosses like Neve or Child can actually feel great. They're fantastic bosses, I love them, but the other ones can feel so dull, it's not even funny. There are bosses in this game, I would never do them if I just don't have to. On the other end, in Wuwa, every single boss is awesome, and every single weekly boss is awesome as well. Putting echoes and artifacts side by side, both games have a very similar system. I do like that Wuwa have echoes that can be used as skills, I think that is fantastic. On the other hand, I love that in Genshin you can use 4 pieces and then leave a 5 piece for your own flexibility, for whatever that may be. So both games have something I like about it, so this one goes to both of games because both of games do something good with this. From this point onwards, we're gonna ignore that Wuwa is quite a bit younger than Genshin and just compare them as they are today. It is impossible to predict how both of these games are gonna look in the future, so starting off with the world, although it is hard to compare them like I said before, even putting aside the fact that Genshin has such a bigger selection of the world essentially, I would still have to give it to the Genshin, even if it was in its first release. I just think it's a much better looking world, it's much more adventurous, it feels great, it just looks fantastic, it gives you that warm feeling inside when you just roam around and explore it. Every time I log in into Genshin, I just want to explore the world. Every time I log in into Wuwa, I just want to play the combat, but world exploration is not the main priority for me. That being said, Wuwa also has a very beautiful world. I think it's awesome, I think it's very unique. It has this certain style to it, but still I prefer Genshin over Wuwa on this one. Now for the main cities, once again, kind of hard to compare it, but if we just put a couple of them side by side, I think for today I would have to give it to Genshin simply because there are more cities and I can make a better educated decision, because in Wuwa there's only 2 big cities and one of them is not that big. That being said, if Wuwa does end up releasing cities like the first and second city that are very beautiful, very unique, have many details in them, then I think in the future this might switch, but for now I'll have to give it to Genshin. As for the daily tasks, once again we'll have to give it to Wuwa. Once you put them side by side, you can see that in one you have to do 4 quests, and yet in the other one is like do a few things and you're done. It's just so much faster and nicer. As for the puzzles, I'm not really a big fan of either, but maybe Wuwa is a little bit slightly less annoying. Really, that's about it. In both of these puzzles are either too easy and you think why are they here, or they're too annoying and too difficult and you think who the hell wanted to put these things in, they're so annoying. There's almost no middle in both of the games. As for the shop, I don't know what exactly should we compare here, but I guess the only thing we could like relatively directly compare would be the subscription, and I don't know how about different regions, but at least for me, in Genshin it costs €1 less, so I'll give it to the Genshin I guess. As for the map sizes, it's pretty difficult to compare these 2 games as well, one is so much younger than the other, but at least at this point in this time, and who knows how these games will look in the future, right now you simply have to give it to Genshin simply because it's way bigger and there's so many more things and so many more regions. And the last one would be the art style, and although it is insanely hard to compare, I'll just put it like this: Wuwa feels a lot more serious, a lot more dark. On the other hand, Genshin feels a lot more adventurous, a lot more silly and pretty, and I love both of them in very different ways. Like I said, these are just my personal preferences, they do not mean anything. I just wanted to put these 2 games side by side for you to see, because when you put 2 things side by side, it makes it a little bit easier to spot the differences and see which one do you think is better in each of these things. So let me know in the comments which on these things you prefer Genshin and which on these things you prefer Wuwa. Thank you for watching and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care my friends, bye bye.